Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. Despite Trudeau saying there's a snowball's chance in hell it'll happen, Donald Trump continues to talk about taking over Canada. But is he trolling us or testing the waters? And they may only be a week old, but Generation Beta is already making waves. So what's in store for the future of the newest generation? And what do you think defines yours? I'm Amy Bell in today for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. And thank you so much for joining us here on radio, TV, and live stream. You can call us now on our top story. Are you worried about Trump's continuing talk about taking over Canada? Our number is 604-669-3733. You can also call us at 1-800-825-5950 or pound 690. You can always email us bctoday@cbc.ca. And Canadian political leaders are responding to incoming U.S. President Donald Trump's desire to apparently make Canada the 51st state. Have a listen to Trump speaking yesterday.
As Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada. But here's the problem with Canada. So many friends up there. I love the Canadian people. They're great. But we're spending hundreds of billions a year to protect it. We're spending hundreds of billions a year to take care of Canada. Why are we supporting a country, 200 billion plus a year? Our military is at their disposal. All of these other things, they should be a state.
That, of course, incoming U.S. President Donald Trump speaking yesterday. Canadian politicians are dismissing the idea and spoke with reporters in Ottawa earlier today.
The guy's full of hot air. I mean, we all know that. And I think he should concentrate on his issues in his own country because he's got lots of them.
Very businesses in Republican states, whether it's Ohio, whether it is Arkansas, whether it is Missouri. So there is a win-win here for Canadian, for Americans, and these jobs are American jobs.
He's not joking at this point.
He is not, and we are taking it seriously.
When he did it during the dinner at Mar-a-Lago the first time, he was smiling and it felt like a joke. No, I think that now it's becoming very counterproductive, and the joke is over. I think it's ridiculous. There's no chance of us becoming the 51st state. I think that this is beneath a president of the United States.
Those are Liberal MPs Judy Sgro, Mary Ng, Dominic LeBlanc, and Mark Miller speaking to reporters in Ottawa. Even the leaders of the major political parties are on similar pages about the prospect of joining the United States. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wrote on social media, "There isn't a snowball chance in hell that Canada would become part of the United States. Workers and communities in both our countries benefit from being each other's biggest trading and security partner." Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre wrote on X, in part, "Canada will never be the 51st state, period. We are a great and independent country. We are best friends to the U.S. And NDP leader Jagmeet Singh wrote in part, "No Canadian wants to join you. We are proud Canadians, proud of the way we take care of each other and defend our nation. Your attacks will hurt jobs on both sides of the border." So what do you think of Donald Trump's desire to annex Canada to become the 51st state? Would you want Canada to join the United States? Call us now at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining us now is Terri Givens. She's a professor of political science at UBC with a focus on race, gender, politics, and the United States. Hi, thank you for joining us, Terri. How are you?
I'm doing well, and thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's always exciting in Canadian politics lately. What do you make of President-elect Donald Trump's comments about wanting Canada to become the 51st U.S. state.
Well, I think it's really interesting because I've been following the responses, and I think, most people think this is a crazy idea. But, one of the things I'm realizing is that, if Canada theoretically, and I don't think it will happen, were to join, it would be, clearly more of a blue state because 60% of Canadians preferred Kamala Harris over Donald Trump.
Right.
And another survey said 80% of Canadians were against any kind of, unification with the US. So I don't think it's even possible in terms of politics for that to happen.
It's hard to say. He has many ideas, but where do you think Trump comes up with ideas like this? Is it just all, bluster and trolling? Is he testing the waters to see perhaps what people would be open to?
I think there's some testing of the waters because I don't think he understands necessarily the complexity of trying to do this. I think, the problem with Trump is it's really easy for him to just, put things out there.
Sure.
The typical president would be very cautious. They would be very diplomatic. Trump has not shown any signs of being diplomatic. And, given this is his second time around and, he's had 4 years, I think he's become even less, concerned about, the diplomatic or even the fact that he's attacking an ally. One of the things that lots of people are saying, lots of pundits and so on, is that, it's a sign that, the fact that he's going after allies and friends instead of potential enemies is just that it's in a way to build himself up.
And I mean, as you said, a typical president. Nothing about Donald Trump has been typical in his presidency since day one. So I guess there is that sense that it is perhaps unsettling for some people as they don't know what he'll do next or what he's capable of. Is in some sense that part of a plan to keep people guessing and keep people on their toes?
No, I think that is definitely a part of it, but it also takes people's attention away from things that are going on that he may not want people to be thinking about, like his potential sentencing, what's going on with the economy. I mean, people, said they voted for Trump because they wanted to see less inflation.
Right.
He's not talking about that. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that, there are some real critical issues going on that he's taking attention away from.
Right. Right. We have a lot of calls coming in, Terri, so I'd like to get to some of them. Lisa in Kamloops. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. What do you make of Trump's latest plans to take over Canada?
Well, the one thing I just want to mention is, as a Canadian, Ukrainian Canadian, one thing I'm super proud of is how over the past 5 years we've really focused on truth and reconciliation. And what I don't like seeing is all these white people standing at the platform discussing, what their visions of Canada is. Why are none of these chiefs being allowed to come to the table and say, wait a minute, the government doesn't own all this land. We are rightful owners of this land. If Trump wants to talk, he needs to talk to us and bring us to the table as well.
No, Lisa, that's a really good point. Canada has an incredibly...
Canada is no longer a colonial, it's not a colonial vision. And what Trump and Musk are trying to do is colonialism times 10. And I'm sorry, Canada, we don't work that way anymore. Our chiefs should be at that table every single time.
Absolutely, and I thank you for raising that. And Terri, I can see you nodding in agreement. And it's true, we have an incredibly complex and difficult past that we've been trying to reconcile with. And this is perhaps something that, Indigenous people of Canada should have greater say in.
Yeah, I agree. And, one thing that this brings up is that history of colonialism.
Yeah.
And, the last time the U.S. tried to invade Canada, that didn't end up so well for the United States. And in fact, we might want to remind Donald Trump that the White House got burned down.
There was that minor detail, yes.
Yes.
Not that we're threatening to do that. Let's just make that clear right now. But there are lessons certainly that we can learn from history here in Canada, but certainly Donald Trump might want to brush up on. We'll head now to Diana in Burnaby. Hi, Diana. What do you make of all this from Trump?
Oh, I think that's just a tease. He would never take Canada. Canadians don't like that idea. Politicians talk all of them. At least we're united over one topic, that Donald Trump can take Canada. We live in a democracy. But my question is, that's given. I don't even know why we're entertaining this idea, but anyone probably make a good show. Who is representing us with the negotiation? Because he's going to hurt Canada. He's not going to take Canada, but he's going to hurt Canada. Tariffs are coming, and we're done. Our economy is going to be finished. So can we spend time talking on that subject?
And that's the very fair point. Of course, we needed to address that Trump is repeatedly making not just these comments. He's posting so much on social media. It certainly is getting a lot of attention, but it is unnerving a lot of people. And I think, Terri, it is sort of tapping into that underlying fear that a lot of Canadians have of what a second Trump presidency will have, that effect it will have on us in Canada. And as she mentioned there, this could be incredibly difficult times for us in terms of our economy and those intercountry relationships. So, what do we seriously need to be looking at if it's not this threat of annexing Canada? What are the things we really should turn our eye to right now?
Well, it's clearly the economic impact of Trump's policies. Is it going to be tariffs? Is it going to be, targeted tariffs, things like that? And I think that's part of the issue here is people have heard him talking about the implementation of tariffs, that he might, I think the last couple of days, people are realizing he may try to use tariffs as a weapon, in a sense, to get concessions from countries. Not only is he talking about Canada, he's talking about Greenland, he's talking about the Panama Canal. And so I think the concern is that he's willing to hurt other countries economically, which unfortunately will also hurt the US. So, we live in a globalized world, and in particular, our economy in the US is so enmeshed with Canada's and Mexico's that anything he does against those countries comes right back on us.
Exactly.
So I think there's a lot of fear in the US as well that we're going to see more inflation instead of less, and that his threats are actually something that's hurting the global economy.
Right. An email that we had come in from Joanne, and it reads, is Trump thinking he can become king of using Canada as a path to make the U.S. a monarchy and become besties with King Charles? I'm not sure the UK wouldn't come to defend Canada. Has Trump given any thought to the First Nations and our ownership of the majority of the land? And Trump has been enamored with Putin and exchanged what was described as love letters with North Korea. When he says he will use economics to achieve this, but he has also made reference to military protection from who? Putin. Trump is ignorant when it comes to history and geography, never mind respect. Thank you for that, Joanne. And she was emailing us from Victoria. I do want to ask you, Terri, you are from the U.S. and grew up there. You went to UCLA. How has your perception, I guess, of Canada changed? Sort of what was it as you were growing up and what you would hear while you were growing up as our neighbor, and now that you live here and have been here for a few years, what has changed for you?
Well, I grew up in Spokane, Washington, so not far from here.
Oh, you can be part of Cascadia when we take over
Exactly.
that.
Yes, that's what I was going to say is, growing up, I always heard about Cascadia.
Yes.
And frankly, a lot of us who are, and I will admit I'm more on the left, but kind of moderate left. I would say that a lot of us are talking more and more about Cascadia, and actually, the Western states becoming part of Canada, anyway, that's also a pipe dream. My impression of Canada has changed dramatically in the sense that coming here has opened my eyes to the reconciliation process, which the U.S., even though President Biden did apologize for the era of residential schools in the U.S. just a few months ago, we are so far behind in the reconciliation process. And, that's why we won't hear anybody, particularly in the Republican Party, talking about the rights of Indigenous. I mean, if anything, they're ready to go back and take back some of the lands that were created as national monuments and so on,
Right.
to use them for, oil exploration and so on. And so there's not a lot of discussion about reconciliation processes. So especially here in BC, I've really been impressed with the fact that we do take into account the Indigenous rights and so on. I mean, there's much more work to be done always, but the U.S. is way behind on all that.
Stuart is going to join us now from Surrey. Hi, Stuart. How are you feeling about Donald Trump's latest round of threats to Canada?
I think we have to consider them seriously, and I think it really is more than just an attempt to get us economically on tariffs and things like that. And I think you have to consider it for two reasons. Reason number one is I think that Donald Trump is looking for a big legacy, a lot more than just simply putting a big fence between the U.S. and Mexico, say. But I think it's part of not just Donald Trump, but I think if you step back and look at things, I think you're beginning to see a new geopolitical global strategy emerging in which probably the good old days of globalization and the internet are beginning to wear a bit thin and break down. In Russia, Putin is trying to take the Ukraine. The Chinese are making considerable attempts to take certain waters out of international territory, and so when we look at Donald Trump saying he'd like Canada, he'd like Greenland, he'd like the Panama Canal, I think what we're seeing is the superpowers are basically now trying to carve the world up into distinct blocks so they can get their hands on as much resources and territory as they can. I think we're beginning to see a completely new geo-global political strategy emerging since COVID. And I think we have to take this very, very seriously, because even if Donald Trump doesn't get Canada in his 4 years, and I certainly hope he doesn't, these issues are not going to they're not going to go away. The superpowers are going to want, the control of resources. They're going to want their blocks. I think this is a new trend.
Stuart, I thank you for bringing up that point. And Terri, I do want to get your take on that, because that echoes a sentiment that a lot of people have said, that we really need to look at the big picture globally of what is happening and what has happened recently and what could occur in the future.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. Not only is China looking at the South China Sea, but they're also looking at Taiwan. You've got what's going on in Israel and Gaza. The Middle East in general is, a flashpoint. And so, yes, this is a global situation. And what's interesting is, yesterday there's a Fox News host saying, I want to be an imperialist, which is really stunning to hear, because we thought we were past that era of imperialism. But realistically, I grew up during the Cold War, and there was that time period when we were dividing up the world between basically the Soviet Union and the U.S. And so we may be but we're in a much more multilateral world where China is a bigger player. We're not sure what other countries may come to rise in this environment, but certainly we have to expect that Russia is going to continue its push into Ukraine, especially, and they'll be emboldened because of Trump's election. China may be emboldened to go into Taiwan. There's all kinds of things going on that we have to pay attention to. And to echo what an earlier caller said, I think it's important that the Canadian government, I'm sure they are working on all these fronts, and that they're prepared to consider how these things may play out and impact Canada and then our broader global situation.
We are running out of time, but I do want to get in a couple more calls, or at least one. Carl in Vancouver, I believe you have an interesting point about what you would like to see happen. Could you explain that for us?
Yes, I've worked in the United States and through the H-1B visa years ago, and I see us joining United States, and each province should be a state, not all Canada being 51st state. We would never get along with Quebec and everything else that's going on with the division. So each province should be its own state, and I think we can make it work.
So just make it one big sort of North America as a super country, and we would all just be our own part of it, similar as we are in Canada with the provinces.
Exactly.
All right, that's a very interesting point, Carl. Thank you for that. And we are nearly out of time, Terry. In a minute, what do you make of that? Each province separately joining.
Well, they're both federal systems. Canada's population is much smaller than each province, compared to California and New York. So I think, it would be a very difficult transition, and there's so many issues around sovereignty, including Indigenous sovereignty, that would have to be dealt with. So I'm very skeptical that anything like that could actually happen. But
Right.
yeah, it's a federal system, and that would have to be taken into consideration.
All right. And quickly, very quickly, before I let you go, Trump obviously takes office in less than 2 weeks. What do you think is the first thing that might happen between Canada and U.S. relations?
Oh gosh. Well, we'll see if those tariffs come into play.
I guess so.
In my mind, trade is the number one issue.
I think it's the number one issue for a lot of people. And I have a sneaking suspicion that we're going to be speaking to you in the very near future.
Indeed. And yes, and besides trade, immigration. And I'm happy to talk about the immigration issue as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today, Terri. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Take care.
You as well. Terri Givens is a political science professor at UBC. And just before we go, I will read out a couple more emails that we have just received. Leslie says, the U.S. tried to attack Canada before and was thwarted by Laura Secord. Can't take his rhetoric seriously. Well, that is a fair point. And Peter says, instead of clutching our pearls about Trump, we should be asking how we allowed ourselves to be led by a government that allowed Canada to become so weak. Instead of focusing on ridiculous social and economic policy, the Liberal government should have been working on expanding our trade with other nations to insulate us from the U.S. All Liberals and their voters are to blame for this situation. It is 12:27, and this is BC Today. And in other U.S. news, we're keeping a close eye on the devastating blazes in California. 4 separate wildfires in Los Angeles are raging out of control. They've forced thousands from their homes, and 2 people are confirmed dead. The LA County Fire Chief says more than 1,000 structures have been destroyed. The biggest fire is in the Pacific Palisades district between Santa Monica and Malibu. Freelance journalist Steve Futterman is on the ground in Pacific Palisades, and he spoke to the CBC's Andrew Nichol this morning.
Listen, I have covered fires for decades. I've never seen one like this here in Southern California. It is just, and the fact that they don't have any idea when they might get control of it, Andrew, really makes it even more bothersome and worrisome. Now, let's look at some of these businesses that have been destroyed, not just the homes, but many businesses that have been here in the Palisades area for decades and decades. These completely gone. 24 hours ago, there were multi-million-dollar homes here. What do you see now? Nothing. You can see some scaffolding, you can see a chimney here and there, but nothing remains. We didn't know how bad it would be until morning struck. We saw how bad it was. The fire is spreading. That is just a reality. That does concern people a lot. As for what caused the fire, not really clear right now. They're all under investigation. One fire, it's believed, was caused by a transmitter exploding. And then when will they get some control? Who knows?
This is BC Today on CBC. In our next half hour, we're going to be talking about the brand new Generation Beta. They're only about a week old, but they've got a bright future ahead of them, I hear. The CBC News is next with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Abbotsford police say they have found the bodies of 2 people inside a burned-out vehicle. The Mitsubishi Outlander was found on fire in Sumas Mountain Regional Park last Friday. The victims have not been identified. Homicide investigators believe they were targeted, but there's no word on a possible motive. New Westminster police say yesterday's evacuation of the courthouse and Douglas College was due to a threat of an explosive device. They say officers closed the area for several hours out of an abundance of caution. Police say officers canvassed the area and nothing suspicious was found. And the BC Wildfire Service says it has not been called on to help fight the massive wildfires tearing through the Los Angeles area, but Quebec's Forest Fire Protection Agency says a pair of their water bombers and their crews have been actively involved since yesterday. Officials in LA say at least 70,000 people have been ordered to evacuate the area due to the fires that have killed at least 2 people. And now the BC forecast on the north coast. A chance of showers this afternoon with a high of 7. Highs around +1 with sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, mainly sunny with a high of 2. Highs around 1 with periods of snow in sections of the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, clearing this afternoon with a high of 3. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, clearing in some areas, a chance of drizzle in others with highs around 7. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you, Rob. And
welcome.
did you know what the name of the new latest
Didn't
generation
you just say
is?
it before
yeah, but you
the
never
break?
pay attention to me.
That's true.
So,
So you're going to have to tell me.
Generation Beta.
Oh, that's a fantastic name. Love it.
It's similar to Boomer, which I assume you are.
Am I?
No. You're not.
I'm not sure.
We're Xers. We're Generation Xers.
Are we?
Yeah.
I don't think we're in the same, are we?
We'll
I'm
discuss
slightly
it later.
older than you, Amy.
Perhaps. Slightly.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, though.
Yeah, anytime. Thank you. And thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1. And our friends at On the Coast are covering some great stories coming up at 3 today. Here's what they have lined up.
Coming up on today's show, we'll hear about DNA gathered from a crime scene in Ottawa 30 years ago and how that led to the recent arrest of a 73-year-old Vancouver suspect. CBC's Karen Larson is going to join us with more details on that. And think about this. If AI technology commits a crime, who's at fault? We'll hear about a new UBC course that examines questions around the legal implications of new technology and whether robots have rights. I hope you'll join us between 3 and 6 for On the Coast.
And whether you are a boomer, a Gen Xer, or a millennial, every generation has its own unique definition and its own place in history. But a brand new generation is being born, literally this week, and they're being called Generation Beta. And with environmental, political, and technological turmoil possibly on the horizon, what will their future look like? And what do you think is in store for Generation Beta? I'm also curious what defines your particular generation. Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone, or email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining us now is Susan Cito, Vice President, Market Strategy, Environics Research Group. Sorry, that was a mouthful for me. Hi, Susan. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, as I mentioned, Generation Beta is brand new. They just were starting to be born 1st of January. But who exactly are they?
Well, I think it's tough to say at this point, right? Because many of the people that we work with, so at Environs Research, we're a research consultancy. We've been doing a lot of work tracking the values of people and across generations in Canada and in the U.S. for almost 5 decades at this point. And for the most part, with our clients, we always see interest in what's next, right? The youth of tomorrow and keeping a pulse on what's to come.
Right.
And so the talk about the beta generation beta, I mean they're still in the belly at this point, right? We're still thinking about, well, let's do a lot of research on Gen Alpha. They're the next ones in the pipeline because we've done a lot of research on the elder generation, the boomers,
Right.
everything from the Gen X up to Gen Z. Gen Alpha is some untapped territory that we have yet to explore, but I think it's still very early days to kind of predict what Gen Beta is going to look like.
Fair enough. Although I know, of course, there's always people, trying to peer into the future and see what it could be. But, technology, obviously a huge one. And AI, many people saying, beta could be the first generation that grows up sort of fully integrated with AI technology and what a change that will have on their advancements. But, as you look back through history, technology has typically had a huge impact on each generation in different ways. And there's those generations that sort of I guess, are sort of sandwiched by different technologies and spend half their life without it and half with it. What is it like for a generation that is born and raised fully immersed in a certain technology? I know my children can't imagine growing up without an iPhone and the internet. It amazes them that I somehow survived without that. But what is it like to fully grow up, say, with AI technology?
Yeah, so I think that's a really fascinating aspect because when you think about each of the major generations, I mean, we all, for the most part, go through very similar life stages, but there are different life experiences during those formative years or during periods that are shaped by those historical events and social and economic shifts, and of course the technological advances that you're talking about. So even in the earlier days, say with the elders and the boomers, there was the Industrial Revolution and all those kinds of things where what we don't think of as technology had a very strong shift to play. And I'm a Gen X. I grew up during the rise of technology, right, and the digital.
I think it's worth mentioning we probably are the best generation, Generation X.
Yeah,
but
I'd say we're a balanced generation.
we are a very balanced generation.
We knew what it was like to exist without technology, without having everything at our fingertips.
Right.
In a way it's very nice, right? And now when you take a look at what's been happening is with millennials, I'd say that they kind of went through the whole .com bubble. There was the big tech boom. They're probably very well adapted in terms of using technology, but when it came to the Gen Zs, that was really when that whole digital upswing took place, and social media became it came into existence, and the sense of community and how people could participate and be exposed to people all around the world through technology really kind of played a key role in how they experienced their lives. And then certainly with Gen Alpha, I have kids. They're also, I feel, addicted to the screen.
Yes.
But they're also at a stage where AI is becoming pretty prevalent, and they're making use of AI. Hopefully not for school. But AI is becoming a very strong reality for them. The rest of us are trying to catch up, I feel. And so Gen Beta is going to be existing in a world where we called, Gen Alpha, the digital natives. Well, these are going to be the AI natives.
Yeah, and with that use of that sort of the first frontier, the people that first sort of get integrated with it, that's sometimes when we can see the greatest harm as we learn from their pitfalls and perhaps mistakes. I would love people to call in and just give us their predictions of what Generation Beta might be facing, but I'd also love to hear from all different generations about what defines your generation, what perhaps makes it the best, or what you wish you could change about it, or what's misunderstood. You can call us, of course, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. We do have a call from Chris in Victoria. Hi, Chris. What are your thoughts on Generation Beta?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've got a pretty bleak outlook for Generation Beta.
All right.
I feel like it's going to be the generation that's going to be in charge of cleaning up our climate mess. Or maybe trying to live through it in whatever way they possibly can. You know, we've already got to the point where we've, reached a tipping point of 1.5 degrees of global temperature increase with no prospects of this improving in the near future. We have global extreme weather that's continuing to get worse every year. Food availability based on that will be less. Population growth is going to increase, so availability of things like housing and those kinds of things are going to continue to get worse. And with that, affordability will continue to decline. And I think really the worst part of this is that the trend right now in North America and even a bit globally is to elect governments that are pulling away from improving climate policy and solutions. For example, the incoming Trump government in the U.S. and the prospect of a Pierre Poilievre-led conservative government here in Canada. I anticipate with these kinds of decisions that we're making now, this beta generation is going to have a really tough time in 40 or 50 years from now. And I'm a little scared and frankly embarrassed to think of what this generation might have to deal with. What defines our current generation or my generation? I think ultimately in history, our generation will be defined as the one that has failed future generations when we had the chance to make a difference. And I'm really disappointed with that. So, I think there's an opportunity for improvement still, but I don't see any trends towards that in the near future, unfortunately.
And Chris, what generation are you part of?
That's putting me on the spot.
All right, fair enough.
I think.
No, it's fine. We will leave it at that then, Chris. And I thank you for your thoughtful comments. And I think, Susan, that's something we hear perhaps every generation, that they are going to be picking up the slack, cleaning up the mistakes of the previous generation, whether it's emotionally, environmentally. But it does seem that we are in a very bleak state, and that future generations are going to be paying the price for the acts of many generations before them. How do you sort of, reconcile that with a generation? To support them and encourage them and know that they are going to be heading into some very difficult times?
First, I want to preface this by saying, I don't want to speak for other generations. I mean, again, I did identify as Gen X, the kind of forgotten, disillusioned, kind of cynical generation. But I feel like, this is kind of a cycle that does take place over and over again, where, generations always look back and say, well, back in my time, things were like this, and those were kind of the ideal scenarios, and the youth of today and all those different kinds of groups are there are criticism. So, a lot of generations are often pitted against each other in popular culture and in media. Of late, there were a lot, younger generations are the whole term, okay, boomers.
Yeah.
And then the reverse, where like, oh, these little, Gen Z snowflakes in the workplace, all those kinds of things, right? So I think I want to say that we need to be careful not to take the stereotypes and the caricatures that do exist for each of the generations and paint them with one broad brush, because there are very strong differences within. And I think given the technological change that's been taking place, maybe the Gen Beta is going to be better equipped. They're going to be more adaptable. They've been, they're a group that are going to be existing in a post-pandemic world where there's a lot of turmoil, but they also have access to a lot of tools and support that they didn't have access to before. Whether it's enabled by technology, whether it's enabled by a growing openness to diversity, to differences and those kinds of things. So I think while they're going to be dealing with not the best scenarios and a lot of challenges that, we've kind of paved the way for, past generations have paved the way for. I don't think they're any less equipped to be able to navigate those challenges than previous generations were in terms of navigating other kinds of, environmental challenges or political challenges and those kinds of issues.
And that it seems, every generation does have its great tragedies. It has its great triumphs. This is the pattern of history and of humankind, in a sense, that we need to remember. I just want to read an email that came in from Jordan. He writes, "Is it just me, or are these generations coming and going faster than normal? I have 3 kids, aged 14, 4, and 2, and 1 on the way. But they will basically all be from 3 different generations. Or maybe they will either identify as Gen X or Gen Z Alpha, maybe Zalpha, or now Alpha Beta. What will those be called? Alphabets? Alpha Betas?" Jordan in Victoria. And it does echo a sentiment that I've heard from others, that it just seems like there's too many generations now. Typically, how do we define these different eras when, as you say, you've done research on this and your organization for many, many years with various different generations? How do we sort of define them?
Well, we actually make it more complicated because we segment them. So we have we have the generations, but within each of the generations, we work with understanding, those deep underlying motivations or values that are really kind of are those mental postures and mindsets, those fundamental worldviews that kind of shape how we as human beings see and interact with the world and those around us, how we take on challenges and opportunities, and those how we react to risk and change. And so in the pre-boomer generation, we have only 3 segments, but we have 7 Gen Z segments, and then about 4 to 6 segments for the generations in between. And each of them have a name. They all look very different because they are, for the most part, differentiated by the values that they hold. And so, again, this goes back to my earlier point about how I would caution against, buying into the stereotypes or, again, painting the generations with one broad brush, because there are differences within, and there are commonalities of different mindsets across the generations, right? So, you can be in, let's say, the workplace is an area where a lot of this conversation keeps cropping up, because I feel like that's an area where there are conversations taking place pitting one generation against the other. And
Very
it's like,
much so.
Well, the roles and responsibilities, level of experience, all those kinds of things are very concrete, factual things. But within that, there are differences. It's not just, here's a Gen or a millennial here, or a Gen Z coming in here, and they're all entitled. They're going to, rise up, climb the corporate ladder in 2 years and have these expectations. And it's like, get out of the way, you boomers,
Right.
Or managers. It's the need to understand those differences across values and those things that make people human, and what motivates them and what drives them is really critical to understand. It doesn't just apply to the workplace, but in all other areas as well. But to answer your question, we make it much more complicated for ourselves by segmenting the generations and having even more names to have to remember.
Well, sometimes that's good, though. As we've kind of advanced in society in many ways, we've understood that not everybody falls into this or that so easily. That we have to respect and meet people where they're at. I just want to bring in a call now from Peter in South Slocan. Hi, Peter. How do you feel about this Generation Alpha? Nope, Beta. That's what we're talking about.
Hi, thanks, Michelle, and thanks for the program. I listen every lunchtime. I'm very confused about all these different generations. I don't know when they start or when they finish. I was born in 1940. I saw as one of the 40th generation.
Right.
The 1950s, I think, became the boomers, but I'm not entirely sure. It would be much simpler if we would refer to these lot as decades, and the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and so on. I'm just so confused. And as one of your previous callers was saying, optimism, the kids are so well able to deal with stuff these days. Personally, I have more complications with computers and you name modern technology just leaves me in the dust. I'm just not with it at all. I so easily confused is what I'm saying. But this business of subdividing into generations, I think it's a load of nonsense. I just don't understand why we even bother with it. And how do we get to generations beta when alpha is the first letter in the Greek alphabet? And what happened to the rest of the Arabic alphabet, for Pete's sake? Anyway, I think it's a load of nonsense, and I really think that there's so much diversity within any decade of people that you know it really is a lot of codswallop. Anyway, that's my sentiment.
And I appreciate your sentiment, Peter. Thank you so much, Peter, for calling in and for always listening. And, you know, Susan, you and I are both laughing because he got such a delightful way of presenting his facts. But it is confusing to a lot of people, and there is sometimes a wish for just simplification. Peter, sort of falls in line with the point I wanted to ask you that you did mention on in the workplace. One thing that I've always found very interesting is it's a place where you have people of different generations quite often working closely together in a way that they wouldn't at, say, school or in a social setting. And I've always found it fascinating to see the different generations, how they connect on certain things and how they'll learn from each other, and it can be such a wonderful thing. What are ways we can encourage learning from the different generations and not having such a divide and recognizing that we do have more in common sometimes than we think?
I think that goes back to, you know, breaking down the stereotypes and not buying into them and recognizing that, you know, while it's easy. And I want to speak to Peter's point about, yes, it is confusing to have all those, you know, different generations and, you know, where's the cutoff. And I'd say the way that we define them at Environics is, you know, a little bit different. There isn't exact agreement around the world in terms of where the exact cutoff is. You know, sometimes it's off by a year or two here and there, but I would say, you know, the generation that Peter's in would be counted as the elder, the silent generation, and then the baby boomers are from 1946 to 64. Those ones are pretty clear. It's more, you know, the generations after that where the line, the dividing line gets a little bit more blurry. And with the Gen Zs, I would say, you know, it's typically defined as those born 1996, 97 to about 2012 or 2010 or so. But there is a lot of talk about, you know, the world is evolving and shifting so much now that's really been enabled by technology as well. And the level of exposure that we have to, you know, the way differences and different ways of living and those kinds of things all around the world. And so I think what that's done, and we've seen that in our segmentations where, you know, in the younger generations, we have more segments that are defined by some values differences. And it is because, you know, there's increasing fragmentation that's been taking place that has been driven to, you know, all these societal shifts and access to technology. So again, it goes back to really making sure that we don't buy too much into those stereotypes and really understand what makes us human, what matters to us in terms of what we value in life, to be able to bridge those differences and understand each other. And again, going back to the workplace, you know, I don't know how much, you know, any of the listeners buy into stereotypes or if you've ever kind of done any kind of segmentation and you're put into a category or a caricature of yourself, whether you think that it reflects you or not. But we like to say at Environics that we're more than our demographics or our behaviors, right? We are, who we are as people is really kind of informed by what we value and what our mindsets are. And so you can connect and have a great friend in the workplace with someone who looks entirely different than you, born in a different year, comes from a different background. And so it's, again, keeping in mind that stereotypes may exist. They may exist for a reason because it makes it easier for some of us to grasp concepts or ideas. But at the end of the day, we are all different people with different lived experiences. And there are key differences even within generations. And so especially in the workplace, but everywhere else too, it's really on us to knock down those walls and find a way to empathize and understand the different perspectives that exist to be able to connect and bridge those gaps.
Exactly. I'll take in a call now from Brad up in Whistler. Hi, Brad. What are your thoughts on the topic today?
I have tremendous concern for not only the next generation, but the existing young generations around digital addictions and the inability to use one's own mind to think and make decisions. In other words, if it's all based on the smart device in your hand or in your glasses or on your wrist or implanted in your neck or wherever it's going to be, how do people be taught by society, teachers, parents, sports, that kind of stuff, to think and use their brains without the assistance of an artificial device?
All right, thank you for that, and that echoing a concern with a lot of people in the recent past and going forward, that technology could have a damaging effect on generations using it now and in the future generations. I do think we have time for one more call. This one from Bob in Mission. Hi, Bob.
Hi.
Hi.
You know, I look at generations. And when I grew up, I'm 77 now.
Okay.
When I grew up as a poor person in West Van, I grew up on the other side. There was fish in the streams and everything else, and it was just fantastic. And everything else. I grew up with the Native Indians. I don't know what to call them now.
Indigenous.
Went fishing with them and everything else. But I see what's happening now, and young people have nothing to work for because they'll never get ahead.
Bob, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we are running out of time. But again, I think a lot of people have also expressed that the younger generations don't have the same opportunities. Just about out of time, but I wanted to thank you so much for joining us today, Susan. It's always a fascinating look at the misconceptions we have and everything. So I thank you for providing some clarity.
Thank you for again for having me, and it's been very interesting listening to the questions from the listeners.
All right, take care. That's Susan Cito, Vice President, Market Strategy, Environics.